welcome to our third panel on circulation. Thanks so much to Maggie for inviting me to serve as chair. I'm Will Deringer. I'm an alumnus fellow from the Society of Fellows. I now teach in Science, Technology, and Society program at MIT. And my interest is largely in financial history, so this is a really exciting kind of adjacent set of topics for me to hear about. And to begin, it's my pleasure to introduce Nina Dubin, currently Associate Professor of Art History at the University of Illinois, Chicago. Nina received her undergraduate degree from Columbia, so welcome back.
Thank you.
And her PhD in History of Art from UC Berkeley. She specializes in French art of the 18th and 19th century. She's been honored by many fellowships, including from the Getty Research Institute in Los Angeles, and most recently, for the second time, the Center for Advanced Studies in the Visual Arts at the National Gallery of Art in Washington. Her first book, published by the Getty Research Institute in 2010, is entitled Futures and Ruins, a wonderful title, 18th Century Paris and the Art of Hubert Robert, which examines how Robert's paintings reflected the artist's engagement with both the ruins of the ancient Roman past and the rapidly changing financial world of the Parisian present and future. So today, Nina will be teaching us about love, trust, and risk, epistolary pictures then and now.
Thank you for that very kind introduction, and thank you so much to Maggie for organizing this and to Maggie's co-organizers for putting all these discussions together. It's so stimulating, and I'm really thrilled to be back at my alma mater. So, again. In 1988, the French conceptual artist Sophie Calm received a commission for an installation from an American bank, which made available to her thousands of images shot by surveillance cameras of clients conducting ATM transactions. Calm scrutinized these inadvertent anonymous portraits for the next 15 years before deciding to call the project quits. Her effort to make art out of the monetary was, as she put it, a fiasco. Desirous, however, of some kind of return on her investment, in 2002 she conceived the idea of turning the project's failure into the basis for a film. Unfinished, as it was titled, appeared the following year, and features the artist interrogating bank tellers and customers alike about their emotional relationships to money. Though well received, the piece has been overshadowed by Calm's highly acclaimed installation at the 2007 Venice Biennale titled Take Care of Yourself. The conception of this piece came about shortly after April 24, 2004, when Calm received a breakup email from her boyfriend. Inspired by the text's final words, "Take care of yourself," she asked 107 women chosen for their profession or skills to interpret the letter. The resulting installation transformed the email into a comic specimen of analysis ad absurdum, variously subjected to charts, graphs, and tabulations, as well as live interpretations by actresses, dancers, vocalists, a clown, and a puppeteer. Deprived of the last word, the letter's author is reduced to an object of diagnosis by the army of professionals Calm enlisted, among them a philologist, lawyer, editor, Talmudic scholar, intelligence officer, and markswoman whose interpretation predictably involved shooting the letter up with a rifle. In short, the project, in employing a man's breakup email as a vehicle for spotlighting the acumen of those analyzing it, was hailed as a humor-filled triumph of female empowerment. On the surface, the failure of Calm's bank project, her faltering efforts to aestheticize the monetary, seems unsurprising, given her intuitive orientation toward affairs of the heart. As one critic in a recent review of the film put it, quote, "The mission that provides the video's momentum to make art out of human engagements with money sets it in sharp contrast to Calm's better-known works, which tell stories of intimacy and personal relationships rather than the abstractions of finance," unquote. My paper today questions this notion of a sharp contrast between the two works by suggesting that Calm's effort to make art out of the monetary was not a fiasco, but was in fact belatedly realized in Take Care of Yourself. I also want to acknowledge, of course, that in the realm of critical contemporary art, one is hard-pressed to identify a work that is not engaged on some level with issues of capital. What makes Cal's piece distinctive in this respect has partly to do with its timing. 2 months into the Biennale's 4-month run, the French bank BNP Paribas announced it was suspending 3 hedge funds that specialized in U.S. mortgage debt, citing a complete evaporation of liquidity in the subprime market. The possibility that tens of trillions of dollars worth of mortgage-backed securities were potentially worthless prompted in rapid succession banks to stop doing business with one another, credit to freeze, the stock market to crash, and economic meltdown to ensue. In short, what Joseph Stiglitz called a cascade of trust destruction. How might we go about considering Cal's installation before this backdrop of mounting financial turmoil? Today's conference underscores the potential of the aesthetic to acculturate audiences to the exigencies of capitalism. Take Care of Yourself provides a case in point, one that turns specifically on its use of the epistolary theme. Cal's photographic portraits of her interpreters employ an iconography rooted in early modern genre painting. The vogue for pictures of women penning or perusing love letters migrated from Holland and reached its apex in 18th century France. Love letter pictures soared in popularity at precisely a time of transition to a paper-saturated economy, fueled by increasingly abstract monetary instruments. As I hope to show, the implication of the epistolary theme in such a context is that the trade in love letters participated in the expansion of a trust-based credit economy. In some crucial way, that is, acquiescence to the uncertain value of love letters presaged the rise of complex financial products as the currency of modern life. The photographic portraits of Cal's interpreters serve as entry points to this tradition, by following self-consciously in the footsteps of Dutch paintings showing women poring over love letters. Cal's photographs recycle conventions familiar from such precedents, as when they feature their subjects seated in dimly lit domestic settings, occupying a claustrophobic workspace, or, as in this example, in proximity to musical instruments, a traditional staple in the iconography of love's seductive power. Merely by turning her back, this researcher in lexicography morphs into the recipient of dispiriting news, a type visualized in the work at right. Many of her interpreters, by dint of appearing beside a window, invite us to perceive them as reincarnating Vermeer's canonical epistolary women, devout exegetes of the mysteries of amorous exchange. According to Cal, Take Care of Yourself resulted from her inability to make sense of the breakup letter, prompting her to solicit the input of professionals. Yet the epistolary theme from the time of its inception has always presented a lover's missive as requiring skilled interpretation, as a document whose contents remain ultimately as elusive as its sender. Pictures by the like of Frans Hals, who may have pioneered the genre, turn all of us into interpreters. They clue us into their narrative through the inclusion of emblems. Thus, the marine view hanging behind the woman above evokes at once the absent lover, whose epistle she bears in her hand, and the Dutch maritime empire he is presumably off serving. Together with the woman's confident bearing, the image of the vessel navigating calm waters suggests the reassuring contents of the letter, insofar as it recalls the age-old conceit likening the sentiment of love to the changeability of the sea. The picture's allegorical character can be further extended given that the challenges posed by long-distance relationships were not unique to separated lovers. The international shipping and trading ventures that occasioned Holland's enviable commercial prosperity marked the shift from face-to-face business transactions to an economy of increasing abstraction and uncertainty. If love letter pictures depict the domestic counterpart to this modern commercial world, they also activate habits of risk assessment, evocative of those required by high-stakes overseas investments. It would not be far-fetched to view epistolary pictures as registering the kinship between romantic and economic trust, nor would it be a stretch to suggest that love letter pictures had associations with the monetary. Evidence that the genre was viewed in precisely such terms exists in this print from 1720. It caricatures the international economic turmoil prompted by the South Sea and Mississippi bubbles, which occurred when the insolvent governments of Britain and France chartered colonial trade companies. In the case of the former, the South Sea Company catalyzed a speculative frenzy in its stock when it took over the British national debt. In France, John Law's economic rescue operation entailed the introduction of paper currency issued by a national bank backed by projected profits. What is crucial about these ventures is that they unleashed for the first time the use of state-sponsored notes by a mass public that had been cajoled into believing in the essentially fictive value of mere paper. The engraving above illustrates the foolishness of trusting in paper promises by analogizing the delirium of speculation to insatiable libidinous desire. Depicting a predatory seductress seated by a writing desk with a view onto a turbulent sea, the print employs the nearly century-old iconography that had appeared in Dutch love letter paintings. The outwardly facing woman by a table, quill pen, paper, and seascape are familiar from works such as Metsu's at left, a picture whose enigmatic character, relative to Hals's, itself reflects the growing complexity of the genre. The print at right reprises such conventions in order to reimagine the epistolary woman as personification of the South Sea Company, shown lamenting the devaluation of her stock. The stormy vessel-tossed sea at right not only alludes to the disastrous collapse of the commercial venture. In accordance with Dutch pictorial tradition, it mirrors the psychic state of a woman scorned. And indeed, the woman's exposed breast and unkempt appearance suggest financial and post-coital depletion alike. According to its caption, the South Sea Company is shown wondering who will console her now that her fictive profits have evaporated. The question presupposes that yet male dupe will be divested of his treasure. The paper messages surrounding the woman allude to assurances broken. The spandrels illustrate the madness of trading in real wealth for imaginary gains, states the text, which vanish in smoke. The work suggests that artists found in Dutch love letter pictures an iconography suited to the depiction of an economic universe premised on the illusions of credit and sustained only by a willingness to endow newfangled financial instruments with imaginary value. The Prince was one of numerous caricatures of the disaster that paired duplicitous women with worthless paper. In Picard's print above, the nude figure of Fortuna at right, showering her devotees with stocks and bubbles of air, is haloed by inscriptions of heartbreak. The miniature captions surrounding her spell out such afflictions as transports of the brain, fevers, deaths, insomnia, hope, regrets, sadness, immoderate joy, bankruptcy, trust, all conditions that denote the melding of financial and emotional volatility. Both of these prints appeared in an anonymously published Dutch volume, and what is striking for our purposes is the pervasive use in these prints of an iconography of lovesickness. The volume's title page depicts a courtship scene, one redolent of a lover kneeling before Venus, though in this case the protagonist is the financial wizard John Law, partnering with a sorceress-like seductress to entrance the masses. Her helpers include 3 cupids, 2 of whom are shown blinding the world with their arrows. If the publication served to educate the public on the dangers of buying into false promises, it did so by translating the mysteries of finance into the more familiar terrain of romantic folly. Love letter pictures in 18th century France extended such lessons. The sly expression worn by Fragonard's fashionable coquette above seated before a stack of love letters, suggests that she is as risky an investment as Picard's Fortuna, despite the promise of fidelity emblematized by her lapdog, and that her unseen lover will fall victim to the disillusionment of a guileless stockholder. In painting and print alike, a surfeit of paper transactions spells the potential for trickery. Both treat a woman's mystique and the mystique of paper as correlates of one another. Of course, in distinction to Picard, Fragonard relishes the potential untrustworthiness of his female paper trader. The ambiguity of the scene is compounded by the painter's erasure of the difference between immediacy and artifice. The painterly gesticulations on the picture surface, the rehearsal of spontaneity, are as coy as the woman's ever so slightly parted lips.
You tried this one?
No. Thank you. Okay. Boucher's painting above exemplifies this use of the love letter theme to perform sincerity while simultaneously awakening skepticism. The two women are shown tying to the neck of a carrier pigeon a letter whose erotic content the picture everywhere insinuates. The barefooted shepherdesses embody an uncorrupted natural order, even as their elegant dress and refined manners recall the pastoral principle of disguise. Moreover, the wide-eyed gaze of the woman at left is the look of compassion, but also of desire, making the painting reminiscent of Boucher's many works treating female homoeroticism. The secrecy of the sealed letter, which directly parallels the picture plane, is thus code for a covert reality that viewers will never penetrate, but upon which they are invited to speculate. Originally titled The Two Confidants, the painting evokes trust while stirring doubt. Epistolary pictures, in effect, trained viewers to tolerate a world of exchange marked by the increasing indistinction between disclosure and dissimulation. Put differently, such works registered the coming to grips with itself of a culture consigned to belief in promissory notes. The genre flourished at a time when France was awash in paper. It was no longer metal currency, but rather credit instruments that rapidly changed hands. The growth of credit marked France's consolidation of a trust economy modeled on that of the Dutch Republic. The expansion of credit meant that lenders and borrowers alike speculated on the trustworthiness of a financial partner, much as courting lovers took a leap of faith in accepting one another at face value. Indeed, the theme of confiance, meaning confidence or trust, was widely employed both in financial discourses and in the period's epistolary novels, whose narratives typically turn on the conquest and subsequent betrayal of trust. This overlapping of financial and romantic trust reflects what historians of early modern Europe describe as the emotional character of economic exchange. Stemming from the Latin word credere, meaning trust, credit referred not to the actual assets an individual possessed, but rather to his or her ability to inspire trustworthiness, to perform it. As a result of this symbiosis between the economic and the social, financial reputation was indistinct from sexual reputation. One's love life literally helped determine one's credit. Relatedly, economic trust was ranked alongside friendship and love as a crucial mode of social bonding. This engraving by L'Épicier plainly equates financial with romantic trust. As the verse indicates, its subject is a young man tormented by his mistress as well as his creditors. This coupling of obligations is reinforced by an abundance of handwritten notes. Their legible bits conjure a familiar narrative. One on the floor makes assurances that a loan will be repaid pending receipt of an anticipated inheritance. Beside it is a note bearing sentiments of affection. Of the two notes held in the woman's left hand, one references argent and the other is a declaration of amour. Judging by her accusatory stare, the woman makes no distinction between these various paper promises just as her lover is paying the price for forfeiting both his financial and amorous commitments. In so emphasizing the similarities between the signs of romantic and financial commitment, the print substantiates Niklas Luhmann's claim that the 18th century witnessed the convergence between conceptions of love and conceptions of credit. To paraphrase Luhmann, the period's new and secular awareness of time, its apprehension that the future was certain to diverge from the past and present, turned fear and hope into inseparable bedfellows. In effect, love was discovered in the 18th century to be a high-risk institution, a matter of gambling on an unpredictable future. A potential mate's capacity to arouse hope functions like credit insofar as it postponed while promising gratification. The period's lenders understood that a borrower's credit was subject to unforeseeable contingencies. Similarly, suggests Luhmann, an unrelenting consciousness of temporality meant that oaths of love were viewed by receivers and senders alike as complex brews of sincerity and insincerity. As it happens, the relevance of this subject matter to Cal's piece of 2007 was recognized by one of her interpreters, Arlette Farge, a prominent historian of 18th century France. Farge begins her interpretation of the breakup email by dryly noting that its author surely lived in the 18th century. So saturated was the period in tales of promises made and broken. Of all the interpreters that Cal contacted, Farge, it should be noted, was among the least sympathetic. Acknowledging an 18th century historian's weary familiarity with such tales of woe, Farge frankly stated that Cal's story did not touch her heart. Farge's distinctive credentials aside, her veneer of aloof dispassion is not unlike that of the majority of Cal's interpreters. Consider the accountant above, shown translating the email into a balance sheet of assets and liabilities. Her calculations replace the seemingly heartfelt regret expressed in the letter with their coldly deduced monetary equivalents. Similarly, the subject at right, a judge, interprets the email as illustrating the contractual nature of a love affair. As she puts it, quote, "The conduct of an amorous relationship is not so different from the negotiation of a lease," end quote. The more we contemplate these photographic adaptations of epistolary paintings, the more the women in them seem to be modeling precisely the kind of detachment, rationality, and analytical precision that has redefined romance in the 21st century. If the digital economy has transformed all of us into data interpreters, this is especially true in the domain of love. Online dating sites promise services based on the same algorithms that are used throughout the financial industry. The pose of studiousness struck by Cal's interpreters is symptomatic of a culture that encourages us to think quantitatively when it comes to love and to live passionately when it comes to our finances. As Cal's piece underscores, risk management is ultimately no more possible in romance than it is in any other domain of our contingency-haunted existence. The artist took care of herself, but only by temporarily filling the void left by that most meaningless of modern phrases. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nina. Anything that gives us OkCupid and the South Sea bubble in the same talk. I didn't think it would be possible to put those together. Next up, we're very excited to welcome José Luis Falconi. José is a prolific scholar, writer, editor, photographer, and curator with particular expertise in contemporary Latin American art. As an undergraduate, he studied at the Pontifical Catholic University of Peru and the College of William and Mary. He subsequently received his PhD in Romance languages and literatures from Harvard. He's currently a fellow in Harvard's Department of History of Art and Architecture, and also holds visiting professorships at Boston University and Brandeis. He's recently also held prestigious visiting professorships at the University of Chile in 2012 and the National University of Colombia in 2013. He has at least 5, soon to be 6 books to his name. Those are just the ones that I could count, but I imagine there might be more. Including recent volumes on the Guatemalan conceptual artist Dario Escobar and the Colombian photographer Jorge Maria Munera, as well as a volume entitled The Great Swindle, about a recent exhibition by Santiago Montoya at the Halcyon Gallery in London, in which money itself served as the artist's canvas. José's next book is entitled Ad Usum, To Be Used, on the works of the experimental artist Pedro Reyes, forthcoming in 2017. Today, José will be speaking about horror, rigor, on the fear and spectacle of frozen capital.
Thank you. And thank you so much for this invitation. I am delighted to be here and seeing old friends. It's amazing. This is a very small field, and actually we should keep it that way. So I'm also incredibly grateful for your paper. It was incredible, and because this is also about broken promises, okay, and a lot of paper too. I just wanted to. Oops. Oh, I have to put. So I'm going to be speaking a little bit, reading much, and then going back to talking a little bit with you guys, because I think it's an ongoing conversation what I'm going to have here. As the paper title goes, what follows deals with one particular feature that seems to be at the forefront of contemporary artistical practice, which is the contemplation of what we could dub the most abject of images, as insofar it goes against the economical and financial order in which we will live, which is the spectacle of capital incapable of joining the financial circuit. If there is an abhorrent image these days, that might be the one, and for which some of the most interesting artists that deal with money, and perhaps I want to talk about that, is based on producing such effect of impotence. So in order to do that, I will set up the scenario and present you with the work of Colombian artist Santiago Montoya, Colombian artist who precisely did this work on paper money in London. And then I'm going to try to give you some very useful tips for your life, you know. And then I will return to the topic of the financial sublime and the possibility of producing something as its very opposite. So let me start with this little poem, a little quote from a poem by Philip Larkin called Money, 1973. I listen to money singing. It's like looking down from a long French windows at a provincial town, the slums, the canal, the churches ornate, and matte in the evening sun. It is intensely sad. That's money. Poetic musings on money are rare, as lyricism and finance are typically thought as polar opposites. But usually they're dead on. Consider Larkin's, the one we have here, which tell of a time so quaint and slow that it seems remote. Believe it or not, there might have been a time in which the music of money, the distinct pitch with which it affects our lives, might have been audible and able to be distinguished from all other dimensions of our daily life. Today, not even 50 years since the poem was written, a mere attempt to disentangle the music of money from the rest of our lived experience might be an exercise of futility. To put it in musical terms, money may well be the white noise of our times, the ultimate backdrop of our existence. So for trying to parcel it out of from any aspect of our life is simply impossible. We not only live engulfed under siege by money, but actually completely conditioned by it, or even enabled. For all we know, especially for those of us wedged in the large urban centers of the North Atlantic, we might be living in a time in which there is no outside of the financial system, despite its recurrent crises. Even art, conditioned by the spectacle and market speculation, might not be sufficiently autonomous these days to render a realm external to this suffocating totality. The slight wiggle room created by the reflective wittiness of Warhol's ironic stance in the early 60s, which hangs on the question, if art is incapable of thwarting the market, then why we don't embrace it as a topic and as a way of life, has all but withered, leaving very little space to even conceive a way of going against the market or simply forgetting it, even for a minute, because it is ubiquitous. But if the dynamics at the center, at the financial center of our system, seem to dissipate even the most ironic, detached, or countercultural gestures, and transforming into bland commodities, which are later branded and sold immediately after, in the periphery of the capitalist domain, with still non-homogeneous practices and local particularities, might be a place to look at, because it might still offer certain clues as how the whole system could be circumvented or resisted, at least for a little while. And that is precisely on these margins, at the fringes of the capitalist world circuit, that one can situate the practice of Colombian artist Santiago Montoya, who during the past 10 years or so has produced a number of pieces which point out some of global capitalism's key flaws and exposing some inherent contradictions which might not be immediately perceptible from the very center. Now, the value of Montoya's work does not exhaust itself in its heuristic probing of the financial system. Plenty of artists have taken on and continue to attempt this effort with varying degrees of success. Rather, the work's poignancy derives from the way in which Montoya has been able to summon his peripheral vantage point to transform a very particular trait of Latin American culture, proper to its colonial legacy, into a very powerful interrogative tool deployed for contemporary art. That is, his art activates these economic insights via the subtle teasing out of one of the most central creeds of his own locality, Colombia or Latin America in general, which is the almost sacrosanct belief in the letter legal order, which operates above and apart from everyday societal life. This order, originated during Spanish colonial rule and is still lingering today, involves the almost religious devotion to the letter, la letra, and lettermen, los letrados, which has resulted in a daily dependency on paper, los papeles, that pervades all of society, all of societal life in the region, especially in matters concerning the states. That, in the hands of Santiago Montoya, this belief, this backwards conviction becomes an aesthetical principle for which he is able to identify and challenge some of the most pervasive characteristics of the financial system, laying bare the scheme of all social relations in our own mytopia too often prevents us from recognizing. So, I want to show you one particular way that he does this kind of thing, which is he produced this book with a big project called The Great Swindle for almost 10 years of working in money and art. And the piece that I want to focus is this one. It's called 25% cotton, 75% linen. Okay? On the surface, literally, the piece is subtle yet direct, has a very powerful commentary on the inherent fragility of our economic order. Nonetheless, a second look at the material chosen, paper money itself, reveals a deeper allusion to the enmeshment of the literal legal order to which paper money belongs and the order of daily life. Indeed, if there is a place in the world where paperwork and paper has trumped, even drowned, all other social relations up to the point of producing the most bureaucratic of states, that's Latin America. This order of things is perhaps the most pervasive and entrenched legacy of the Spanish colonial rule that for 3 centuries governed these territories under a centralized state in which legal writing was at the core of every single aspect of social life. Although there is not a historical consensus as why Spain became such a bureaucratic monarchy in the 15th century, after the Reconquista in 1492, the anxiety for recording everything on paper and submitting it to the authorities in Madrid was common practice by the time the conquest of the Americas occurred. In that way, when the colonial rule was implemented in Americas, everything was summarized and submitted to authorities in Spain, who decided the fate of any dispute or adjudicated resources and created further laws. Nothing happened in the continent itself. All had to be sent to Spain, and Spain will send back all the actions. The result of this dependency on legal writing was, on one hand, an exceedingly inefficient, nearly impossible to manage a state administration, but on the other hand, produced an ingrained belief that only entities certified by the appropriate authorities in writing existed and mattered. That is, the only reality that counted was the one bearing appropriate signatures that could be later archived in an official institution. That's why even nowadays in present Latin America, the amount of legal paperwork required for any transaction, it is still appallingly high in comparison to other parts of the world. You to get paper for absolutely everything that you do in life. Obviously, such an overblown legal system created a critical gulf between everyday life and the official realm. Consequently, the people's relation with the law in the region became vexed, muffled, a relationship that could be summarized in the most quintessential colonial saying about the rule of law. Obedezco pero no cumplo, which is I obey but I do not comply. That's what it means. This almost contradictory statement was paradoxically first uttered by Antonio de Mendoza, the first viceroy of New Spain, when he learned about the passing of certain laws by the Crown of Madrid, which he was obliged to enforce despite their negative effect on the people he was appointed to serve. By positing such critical distance between obeying and complying, the viceroy inadvertently articulated one of the most important dictums around which in Latin American culture has evolved: the profound suspicion for the rule, or disdain for the rule of law, or any sort of formal system that imposes us in daily life. It is precisely this complicated attitude towards any formal system, from laws to banking to any sort of official establishment, that can be observed in the following stories that I'm going to tell you from the Colombian folklore, and I think it's going to be some very important tips that I'm going to give you for your life. Okay? These stories, in turn, might enlighten us not only to the exceptional shrewdness in which Montoya has deployed a type of music of money through his artwork, but also, more broadly, the ways in which this hum can still be heard loud and clear on the outskirts of modernity. So, guys, pay attention to this. It's going to be important in your life, okay? Okay. Maybe you will. Some of you will. If you ever need to escape from the police with a couple of $1 million in tow, I recommend you have them in bills of $100. In that way, you will just need an oversized duffel bag to carry the approximately 44 pounds of bills, 22 pounds per million to be exact. Okay? Anything of a lower denomination would be far too cumbersome to carry. For instance, in $20 bills, the stack of money will weigh around 212 pounds and approach 400 inches in height, for which will be impossible to carry. However, those two same $1 million in $20 bill might come in handy if you plan to hide for weeks in a tiny safe house with no heat, high up in the Andes, in any mountains, and you will need to make a small fire to save yourself and your companions from freezing to death. You will have 50,000 bills to burn, literally. You know, you might take a bit of comfort in knowing that the bills are made out of rag paper, a mix of wood pulp, a train brand of paper comprised of cotton, silk, and linen, which will take longer than regular paper to be consumed by fire. If by chance you kept your cash in $1 bills, then you will have no heating problem whatsoever, at least for a while, as you will have approximately 2,200 pounds of rag paper to your disposal. It will be enough to heat a small bonfire for a few days. Okay. On a related note, and again, it's important if you ever face these dilemmas, which are very crucial in our line of duty. If you happen to have some $50 million, more or less, lying around in cash, and you need to hide them in your house from the nosy neighbors or the always irritating tax revenue systems, here is a tip. According to the experts, the 4 best places to hide those bills inside a house are in kitchens, bathrooms, underneath any staircase, and behind false ceilings. In the kitchen, cabinetry and counter areas are particularly good to create secret compartments for stashing a considerable amount of money. The same could be said about, the bathroom, around the bathtub area, underneath the stairs, and over false ceilings. What are they, anyways, if not for the stashing cash? Now, the last bit of my advice, okay, so remember it. Depending how big the house is, and again, this according to experts like the renowned General Oscar Naranjo from the Colombian police forces, the maximum you can stack in those spaces is probably around $15 million if you have it in bills of 100. Stashing anything above this amount will require placing them in fiberglass cylinders covered with an acrylic dome so you can see the bills, which could in turn be hidden underground in a makeshift concrete compartment. For the best results, I recommend that you vacuum seal the cylinders. This will protect your bills from humidity and water damage, ensuring that they will not develop any fungus and preventing a repeat of the tragic tale of the brothers William Moncada and Fernando Galeano, who in 1992 let their caleta, which is their money stash, over $24 million rot away in the San Pio neighborhood of Medellin. Because of their prolonged exposure to damp, humid conditions, the bills constantly needed to be dried out in the sun, which made them way too visible for anyone snooping around. And snooping around was exactly what the bodyguard El Chopo was doing when he discovered the money and stole it for his boss, Pablo Escobar. So here you have the new El Dorado in Latin America. That is $52 million. Okay? Again, it's not a lot of money, but you can do with that for a while. Again, all this comes from the folklore of Latin American tales, especially in Colombia, in which you find this kind of caletas all over the place because of the narco economy. One of the problems with the narco economy is precisely that they have a lot of cash and they cannot flush it into the economical regular system because of it is dirty money, quote unquote. These are some of the most interesting people. This is a case of El Chupeta. Chupeta is a guy who, as you can see, made so many, had so many plastic surgeries that he's almost unrecognizable. But he is one of the few people who really believe in architecture, still believes in architecture, because he actually created his home with these false walls in which he stuck around $200 million around the house in bills. Okay? And that's how the houses of narcos end like this. Because everybody goes to search for them. Once they are caught, once they still think there is a caleta, there might be one left. So they all end up like this. These are called huaqueos. Huaqueos means to go inside like in a huaca. Okay? So that's my part of me telling you guys some important tips for your life. While fascinating in its own right, how this story unfolded and the fate of the owners of the mythical caleta that now symbolizes the last days of Pablo Escobar are beyond the point here. What is important to remember is that when it comes to hoarding mass quantities of cash, humidity and fungus might be your worst enemies. We might not think of it due to the velocity which bills come in and leave our hands, But as anyone who has accidentally run their wallet through the washer and dryer, like me, a lot of times, the material fragility of paper money is disconcertingly real. And it is precisely this sense of disconcernment, concrete disconcernment, one might put it, which is the driving force behind Montoya's 25% cotton, 75% linen, which consists of a perfect cubic meter of white, reprocessed paper money mounted over discrete white plinth. Okay? If you want to talk about laundering money, that's what you have. You have literally $1 million there in front of you. In the first presentation of the Great Swindle in London in 2012, 25% cotton, 75% linen, almost monochromatic presence, with its perfect geometry and all its material eeriness, stood as a massive concrete yet ghostly figure in the gallery, especially in contrast with all the other vibrantly colorful works that he had. It had a radiant opacity, literally. In fact, it will not be an exaggeration to say that the piece was enabled by the completely opposite aesthetic dynamic from one at the play in the rest of the shows. If most of the other pieces affected the viewer by displaying their chromatic surfaces, in this case, the dual white stack of paper, almost drained from all vestiges of colors, relied on the sheer volume to make an impact on the viewer. It is therefore on the calculated work and on the work's calculated plumpness and coarse finish that one needs to understand what he's trying to do. In fact, it is only by coming to terms of how this piece pushes the envelope that we can finally gauge the ultimate subversiveness, the almost kamikaze attitude, one could say, embedded in Montoya's project. This certainly goes beyond the confinements of the by now predictable institutional critique stance. With this piece, Montoya trumps the tired gesture so tediously repeated throughout the contemporary world of biting the hand that fits oneself by going for the whole arm, the whole capitalist system. Sure enough, every good artist might be a parasite of his own right, but Montoya is going postal here, as he attempts to serve the arts world's most sacred tie to society at large, as if he were trying to cut the golden umbilical cord, Greenberg Dixit, with a pair of rusty pliers. Then, the first question that begs to be asked here is one that goes straight to the heart of the matter, of this gray matter, or white matter, or the plinth, that is. Under what conditions can a heap of bleached paper money be considered an artwork? The first step to answering this question is to recognize the work's anti-allegorical stance, propagated by the fact that the viewer stands before is apparently $1 million bleach. You have there a concreteness, and therefore its role as a conceptual counterpoint to the project as a whole, the project of the Great Swindle. In contrast to the other works, which operate through optical dynamics in order to evoke awe, these works elicit a distressed response from the viewer as he or she registers the sheer quantity of paper money, literally drained of its value, and the impossibility of mobilizing it for exchange. The inability to move capital is what torments us. And here in the gallery, as in the context of the global economy. And this is one of Montoya's deepest affronts to his spectator, that the most intolerable spectacle is that of a capital frozen in its track, making us aware of our structural psychological conditioning by the movement of money. What I'm posing here is that basically the force of the work is basically by this impossibility. I mean, it's produced by the impossibility of really making, when you observe capital not being able to really float the system, that sense of impotence is what actually makes the work very powerful and actually is a very strong statement. Much could be said about the ways in which Montoya's use of money as an artistic medium descends from the legacy of Brazilian Cildo Meirelles in the Latin American context. As is well known, Meirelles' piece, Insertions into Ideological Circuits, the banknote project. I don't know if you know this very famous project. It's this one, attempted to subvert the capitalist order by infiltrating it with subversive messages. It was in 1975. He put messages, there'll be subversive messages on all the bills that that came to his hand. Quien mató Herzog was a political prisoner during the dictatorship in Brazil, who, quote unquote, committed suicide according to the dictatorship. Clearly, he didn't commit suicide. He was killed by someone, and they actually released this photo, which was very obviously a stage situation. What Sildo Meirelles did in order to basically propagate his discourse was use the bills, that every bill that came to his hands, and stamp it with subversive sign. He relied on, in this case, Meirelles relied on the robustness of the circuit of wealth, literally disseminating his anti-systemic messages through the system itself, showing that paradoxically, in order to detonate any system from within, the system itself needs to be very efficient. Similarly, through printmaking, we can also talk about Warhol, but I don't think we should do that. We can talk about later, and I'm running. We'll finish in 5 more minutes. Okay. Basically, in the case of Meirelles, the crux of the work was a co-option of the system, with a special emphasis on its inherent need to circulate with increasing velocity. Montoya differs from this precedent through his brass negation of money circulation, by stripping already existing money from its ability to be exchanged and producing what is perhaps the most terrifying aspect of capital, unused and unusable money. Montoya not only halts the movement of money, but actually reverses the direction of its velocity, pointing the vector of value inwards into entropy. It is at this very moment that we start to shake, to feel uncomfortable. It's as if the position we found ourselves as viewers of 25% cotton, 75% linen, seems to coincide with the experience of the desperate narco, powerless to hold his money. The horror of the spectacle of sterile money indicates to us the extent to which we are shaped at our most basic levels by capital flow, and by the same token, we are uncomfortably close to a narco's despair. But if being positioned in the shoes of the narco isn't enough, Montoya further complicates this dynamic by revealing the inherent fragility of value within any lettered system. If the simple defacing of paper money erases its value, then it is clear that the value is only on the surface, and is as contingent as it seems to feel secure and official. No seal, no signature, no official certification can really guarantee absolutely anything. This, of course, recalls of famous Warhol's dictum that there is nothing beyond the surface. If there is nothing beyond the surface, there is actually no value at all in these particular cases. It is precisely the issue of the value of surfaces that leads me to my last story, again taken from the Colombian folklore, which is this one. The anecdote of signing the Constitution of 1991 in Colombia. It is well known, by the time the congressman of Colombia needed to promulgate the new constitution, a constitution actually done in order to be able to have Pablo Escobar extradited to the United States, the document was not finished. Okay, they didn't finish. They had the document to sign. So they signed one by one, solemnly, and in front of all cameras, a blank page. This act, which will seem farcical to anyone from outside the region, but which makes perfect sense to Latin Americans, needs to be understood in terms of the anxiety and dependence of the process in which, as I already mentioned, documents achieve their official status in the region. We need the signature, the seal, the stamp of authority. The signing of a blank paper is a perfect metaphor for the gap between the ideal rule of law, which is perfect and ordered, versus law as it's carried out on the ground, fraught with friction and contradiction. So there you go. Blank pieces of paper. Absolutely no signature ever. Or with signature but no value. If Montoya, and I'm just going to try to summarize this as fast as I can actually. I want to, I will not keep reading because it's kind of long, but I will just try to summarize here. The counter work that Montoya does, instead of, opposing this big cube of money that money has been, of money that has its value been drained, are these landscapes. These are called latitudes, and these are extraordinarily beautiful financial landscapes made out of precisely of bills. What you have in front of you is basically an incredible, almost a financial sublime, in which the very repetition and the very texture of the bill itself just becomes one after the other, ends up in an abstraction that at the end and you end up getting lost. And again, and providing a sort of effect of velocity, of incomprehension to a large degree, and of that which is completely concrete, the bill itself, becomes an abstraction and becomes an incredible metaphor for the way in which the financial system works. So, these are some examples of it. Indeed, very, very powerful if they see all together, in a room. Now, I only have 2 lines, but anyways. So I was going to finalize with this, which is my home. I wish, That's how I left my house in the morning. When I came here. Maybe I should. I will not stop. I will stop reading. But basically, I just wanted to finish by saying that what it seems to me that is playing in this particular in the kind of work of Santiago produced, and not only that, but if you take like Anne Hamilton's very famous piece, Probation and Excess from '89, and you look at it, it's made out of, as you know, it's made out of pennies, $7,500 in pennies, What you have here, you have obviously there is some notion of a landscape. There is a notion of an incredible work that producing in terms of like the honey and the sheep in the case of Anne Hamilton. But again, what it seems to be the most central aspect of the whole, the force of the work, for me in this particular case and in the case of Montoya, is the fact that you cannot look, it's abhorrent to look at this point, in this moment of life, to money that it cannot actually be used or be circulated. That is in itself a view that we feel shaken. We feel just like the narco who has all this money and needs to burn the money because it's cold. This is the famous story about Pablo Escobar. And it's not gratuitous that that he's a Colombian artist working with this kind of folklore in the back of his mind. The other one could be hyperinflation. Whoever has suffered, I'm Peruvian, I suffered a hyperinflation scenario in the 1980s in which we had 1,000,000% of inflation, and you could understand how bills just simply stuck up and they had absolutely no value. We used to decorate our houses with bills. There was no other use for it. Those two might be what is behind here, but one trembles to the very notion of simply seeing $1 million in front of you, without any possible use. So that's what I wanted to conclude, and we can open the conversation with that. Thank you.